everybody, and welcome on in. It's nice to see so many people here today. Hello, hello, hello. Maybe I'll go a little bit slower than normal on my introduction, just to let as many people jump in as possible. But nonetheless, hello everybody, and welcome to Conversations with Authors. Today we bring to you Erin Gordon and her newest book, Peeps. But before we get to our authors properly, let me welcome you to Book Passage's show. If you've seen one of these events before, well then welcome back. We're very glad to have you here again. And if you're new here, then Book Passage is an independently run bookstore out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and we host and run book talks just like these at our store very often throughout the week, and online on YouTube, just like you're watching here now. As we do this now, and will continue to do so in the future, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's completely free to you and helps us out immensely, so we would really appreciate it. And additionally, if you subscribe and click the little bell next to the subscribe button, it lets you know every single time that we go live for a conversation just like these. We basically never go live with anything other than these conversations, so it's actually a very good resource for you to know whenever we have events. If you don't like the idea of that and you'd much rather subscribe to a newsletter, we put out a weekly newsletter that comes out on Monday mornings, which you can subscribe to by jumping over to bookpassage.com. It's on the right-hand bar. Just fill out the little form and we'll get it to you every Monday morning at 9 a.m. If you'd like to check out tonight's book, Peeps, or anything else that happens to get mentioned here tonight, you can find it all in the description below or from me spamming it in the YouTube chat periodically. And finally, and probably most importantly, if you have any questions for tonight's speakers, please take the time to write them in the YouTube chat. It is the only way to get your questions to them, so please do not miss your chance. Now, allow me to introduce Erin Gordon, who's the author of our book today, again, Peeps, and is also a former lawyer and legal affairs journalist. A Bay Area native with degrees from both I said U.S. Berkeley in my prompt. UC Berkeley and Stanford. Gordon's novels explore themes of friendship, parenthood, and self-discovery. In conversation today, we have the inimitable Michael Krasny, who is former host of the award-winning KQED Forum, a program discussing news and public affairs, current events, culture, health, business, technology, and also a dear friend of the store. Please welcome in both of them. Thank you for being here, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
And thank you, Nick, and welcome everybody. Let me echo Nick's welcome and say how glad I am to have you all here and to be here with Erin Gordon, who is a friend for many years, friend of the family, and someone whose work I've come to admire. And I should say that, as Nick pointed out, she has had a couple of careers as a legal journalist as well as a lawyer. And so one of the really initial questions before we get to Peeps that I'd like to ask you, Erin, is why be a novelist? I mean, particularly now when it's so daunting. I mean, you've had quite a commitment to the craft, which I congratulate you for, and congratulations on this novel. But it's daunting to put a novel out there for so many reasons, but particularly because of the nature of publishing today and the challenges. Mm-hmm. Why a novelist? Why are you a novelist?
I have just always loved story. And I wanted to be a novelist since I was like 8 years old. I was a voracious reader. I'm still a voracious reader. And I see story everywhere. When I read Dear Abby or I read an obituary, I just think that's a novel. That's a novel. And I think a lot of writers will tell you that it's like maybe painters feel the same way, like this urge to create. And so I did begin my career as a lawyer because I liked to write. And I think a lot of lawyers do that. But I realized over the course of several decades that it's really story and people that I'm interested in. And even when I get frustrated and think I'm never going to do this again, it's too grueling, then another story emerges in my head and I have to pursue it. So I just think it's in my nature.
It's obligatory. You're compelled, and you have stories to tell. I mean, a lot of stories to tell in this new novel, which we'll talk about, because it's about someone who has a podcast and talks to people and gets their stories. And so we have a melding of a lot of different stories here, to be sure. But you've gone through a kind of metamorphosis. You've written other novels before this novel. Talk about just your, for lack of a better word, journey, if you would.
Mm-hmm. Well, my first novel that I wrote was the result of somebody saying something to me in college, just an offhand remark. And it was one of those moments where I was like, this would be a great novel. And I just had that in the back of my head for a long time. And finally, I just, as you get older, you start to think, well, if I don't do XYZ now, when will I do it? Or will I regret not doing it? And so while I was a journalist, I just realized, okay, if I ever really do want to be a novelist, I got to start writing novels. So I just took that that offhand remark and I wrote my first novel, Cheer, while I was a journalist, sort of on the side. And just that's kind of how it happens. I just can't not write, I guess.
So what set you up to Peeps, which I think probably it's fair to say is the novel you're most proud of other work?
I really like all my novels, I have to say. It's definitely the novel that is getting the most attention. And I think it's my most original novel. I will definitely say that. And so two things kind of came together in the creation of Peeps. One is I knew I wanted to write a journey story. If you look at my YouTube history, it's all like van life, RV life. I just love watching videos of people who take these road trips or live in their vans. And so I thought back to some of the journey stories that I have enjoyed. And I thought back to The Wizard of Oz and to Wild by Cheryl Strayed. And what I realized as I started kind of analyzing those two stories was that they're exactly the same. In one case, The Wizard of Oz, it's a young girl, and in Wild, it's a young woman. And they each take a road. One is the Yellow Brick Road, and one is the Pacific Crest Trail. And they go on a journey to find themselves. And along the way, they meet people who help them help them complete their journey and discover who they are and their place in the world. And so I realized, okay, I want to write the next iteration of this story. And my book is about a middle-aged woman who takes basically the interstate. And so that combined with an idea I had about podcasts. I love podcasts, and I found that a lot of podcasts are about really like extraordinary people. And I think there should be a podcast out there about everyday people, because I just think everyday people are just as interesting as, the movie stars and the scoundrels and the celebrities and the murderers and all those things that podcasts are about. And so I had this idea for a podcast where I would ask the same 7 questions of every guest. And basically, I have no aptitude for, having my own podcast, but I decided it would actually be a great thing for my character to have. And it also would enable her, as she made her way across the country, she could interview these everyday people from all over the place. And so I gave her my podcast. And in between the narrative of her journey as she crosses the country are little, transcripts of her podcasts. So it's sort of like little short stories in between the larger narrative of Meg discovering who she is midlife. So that's kind of how that came together.
So you really wanted to bring to the fore the lives of ordinary people, I think it's safe to say, but also to show, well, it's awful challenging to talk about what your intentions are as a writer, or if you're didactic, or if you want to show kind of a common humanity here, don't you? A connectedness.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the, I don't want to give too much away, but that's, one of the lessons that Meg comes to by the end of the story. And I think that some of the people she meets along the way also learn that as well. And that's certainly what I want the reader to come away with, is that she kind of has this tension between a big life and a little life. So she celebrates what she calls like little lives in these podcasts with everyday people, but she also is searching for a big life for herself and is not sure whether she can have one. And so it sort of also explores that tension as well.
Well, let's talk about her, your protagonist. There's always an assumption when someone young writes a novel about someone young, or someone middle-aged writes a novel about someone middle-aged, that they're writing often about themselves and putting in all kinds of autobiographical fragments of themselves.
Yeah.
But you clearly, I think intentionally, it seems to me, knowing your background and things about your autobiography, tried to write a character very distinctly different than you. Even
Yes, and
put her in Los Angeles even.
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, a lot of my friends have said, I see you in Meg. And there is some of me in Meg for sure. For example, Meg has a practice where she grounds herself every day because she has a lot of anxiety, and it's a practice she calls 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you can read about it in the story. And that's actually a practice that I do. And some of her anxieties are some of my anxieties, for sure. But she is not me. I don't know.
Excuse me, her mother is not your mother.
Right. That's true. Because Meg's mother is, she's a very sort of malevolent, ominous figure in the book, even though the book begins with her funeral. But no, that's not my mom. Meg has a lot of courage, even though she doesn't think that she does. I don't know that I would have the courage to, pack up my life and drive across country. She has a particular purpose for doing that, but so she's not me, but there are pieces of me in her.
So how, you mentioned both The Wizard of Oz and Wild. How do they fit into your vision for this novel? Because you have all kinds of certainly thoughtful references and allusions to those two works. And when people think of The Wizard of Oz, of course, they think of the movie, which is very different than Frank Oz's novel. So
right,
about that a bit.
Right. Well, I think my book is more geared towards The Wizard of Oz, the movie, but and for Wild, it's more the book, because Wild was also made into a movie. But there are a lot of Easter eggs in the book, that reference those two iconic stories. There's a lot in the names. For example, Meg really needs to go to talk to her Uncle Oscar across country. That's what is driving her to make this trip. And Oscar is actually the name, the actual name of the Wizard of Oz, Oscar. That's just one. She adopts a cat that she calls Dottie, after Dorothy. And there's a lot of Wild references too. I don't want to give too many away, but I think if you're a discerning reader and you're a fan of those two stories, you will find many references that I hope are fun to spot.
That's fun doing, isn't it? I mean, especially when you have a couple of works like that in mind, you put them in there for the reader's delectation, so to speak, and enjoyment. Yeah.
So fun. There's also a lot of visual things too, like for example, in the beginning of the book, and I don't know how noticeable this is, and maybe it's better if it's not that noticeable, but you know how in The Wizard of Oz, it goes from sort of a sepia tone to bright color as she leaves Kansas, and the colors in the book do that as well. If you're paying attention, you may notice that. So it's not just names; it's other visual images as well, and it was a lot of fun, a lot of fun.
It's funny because what comes to my mind when you talk about the sepia and the coloring in The Wizard of Oz is a wonderful essay by Salman Rushdie, who is a friend and someone whose work I've admired for many years. An essay on The Wizard of Oz where he literally deconstructed The Wizard of Oz and said, this is all about being home or not being home. And the idea of home or the concept of home comes across sort of in your novel, doesn't it?
Yeah. Oh, wow. I'll have to check that out. Yes. And in fact, there's a shift in the middle of the novel where, something happens. I don't want to give, again, too much away, but something happens, and this safety net that Meg always had about going home is taken away. And that really changes, sort of her notion of this RV, which she nicknames Irv, by the way, just similarly to how Cheryl Strayed in Wild nicknamed her backpack monster, so she nicknames her RV Irv, and comes to change how she feels about it as home, and what is home, and at the end of the novel, it's sort of like, where is she going back to? And that's part of the sort of circle and the completion of the book is her notion of home.
Let's talk also about the title, because one thinks of voyeurism with Peeps, as well as, of course, from the Black vernacular, the idea of people. And this is a book about people. And I suppose you had both things in mind, but you want to kind of give a voyeuristic peep into people's lives. That's sort of the purpose, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So Peeps, the title of the book, is also the title of her podcast, is Peeps. And she names it that because she has those two dual meanings in her head, peeping into people's lives and, people's lives, peeps. And so she kind of wanted that double meaning. And, I think it goes to the idea that, again, everybody's life is interesting. Just people are interesting.
Some people considerably more or less interesting than others, but there's always this idea of ordinary people yet living extraordinary lives or having extraordinary things occur to them that need to be seen in the bigger perspective and the kind of kaleidoscope of their lives. And I think you've given us a sense of that, as well as the common shared humanity. Talk about those 7 questions, though, and how they really are the key here.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I thought, when I was sort of thinking about this podcast that I wanted to listen to, I thought that what would be interesting is to hear the same questions, but all the different answers. It's sort of like, I don't know if you ever used to watch that Inside the Actor's Studio with James Lipton, and he always had this question at the end. And I just thought it was so interesting how varied people's answers were. Again, those are celebrities and this is everyday people. But so some of the questions are things that I have always been interested in. And some of the questions are literary devices to pull out interesting information about the characters that she's interviewing. I think my favorite question, and the one that has gotten the most interest, in reviews and things, is the question of, who did you never see again? And the characters are often confused by this question. And what Meg and what I mean by it, and I think we can all think of people like this, is that there are people that are in our lives, literally could be for a moment, like someone you just crossed paths with in a crosswalk, or it could be somebody you knew and deeply understood for a long time, but no longer are in touch with. And there are just those people that you never see again, but you wonder about. I mean, I have so many people like that. That, if I had $1 gazillion, I would never be able to find these people, somebody I saw on a bus or, whatever, but I wonder about them all the time. And that is something that I'm personally very interested in, if people I know have that experience, but also it was a great way to, for Meg to really uncover some interesting things about the people that she interviews.
Well, I'll turn that back to Meg's creator here. Who do you think of when you have that question posed to yourself?
Okay, well, I will say, I'm going to answer that indirectly, but I am going to answer it, which is that with one or two exceptions, every single character that answers that question is somebody from my life. So I took some of the people that I often wonder about, and I put them, that is a very autobiographical part of this novel. It was my way to sort of honor these people that I think about and will never see again, could never see again. So not every single one of them, but like 75% of the answers to that question are from my life.
And talk a little bit about the uncle and his role in this. I mean, why is it so important for her to talk to her uncle?
Mm-hmm. So what's fun about writing a novel is that, at least for me, is when I'm sort of in the note-taking stage and kind of brewing these ideas, it just happens that things come along and I think, oh, that's perfect, and I can add that to the story. So as I was plotting out this novel, I learned a little bit about epigenetics, which is the idea of whether trauma is inherited. So it's not like a physical characteristic, but for example, there are studies about descendants of Holocaust survivors who have tremendous anxiety and depression and things like that, even though they personally did not have any trauma in their lives. But the idea is that that trauma can be inherited and experienced by descendants. And so Meg is kind of interested in this because her mother, who at the beginning of the novel has just passed away, was a very difficult mother. And she is really trying to figure out, where did this come from? Is this something that is in her as well? Because she has a son, she meaning Meg, the protagonist. And so as a way to kind of uncover, where did her mother's cruelty basically come from? Was it spontaneous? Was her mother also the victim of cruelty? And so she wants to go talk to her uncle Oscar, who is her mother's last remaining sibling, and he's too elderly to travel to her. And so that is sort of the drive to get her across the country and just to really get to the bottom of like what was going on with her mother.
And gives you an opportunity as a writer to sort of play with epigenetics a bit too.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
What when you talk about things kind of falling in your lap, as you just did before, as surprises, you're writing through the novel and working your way through creating it. Let's talk a bit about how you plan and plot a novel and what goes into that.
Mm-hmm. So in the writer world, there are typically two types of people. There are the plotters and what they call the pantsers, people who fly by the seat of their pants. I'm sure you're well aware of this. And I am most definitely a plotter. I think anybody who knows me will not be surprised to know that, because I'm a plotter in all aspects of my life. But definitely when it comes to writing novels, in fact, it takes me longer to outline the novel than it actually does to write it. And my outlines for all of my novels they run upwards of 60 pages. They're very, very detailed. And I like that because, and they're detailed, like they have the senses that maybe the character might be experiencing, like the smells or the sounds in every scene. Because then it just frees me up in the writing stage, just because I'm not stressed about what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen and I can just write. That said, I do allow for changes, and both during the writing stage and in the editing stage. I have a cadre of amazing friends. I think many of whom are on this call right now, and I'm so grateful to them because they give me a lot of very honest feedback. And so I do shift, like if something new occurs to me in the writing stage, or if I get feedback that something is not working or something else might work better, I definitely shift. So I'm not so rigid. But
excuse me, is that in the process of writing, or is that once you've got a draft done?
Both.
Both.
So yeah. So if I'm writing and let's say I've written a few chapters and I realize that the next thing that I've outlined for the next scene actually isn't going to work based on what I've already written, I will shift. I definitely will shift. And then I will shift when I have, readers who tell me, I don't know if she would do this or that. I will change. But it just frees me up to be free when I'm writing if I have an outline of where I'm going.
And that freedom is of utmost importance, I presume.
For me, because it takes away the stress of what should happen now, what should she be saying, and who should she be talking to, and where should she go next. I don't have any of that because I've already decided all of that, and that's why the outline takes me longer than the writing. So for me, that is very freeing. Somebody else, writing is as individual as anything. So another writer would feel very constrained, I think, by my process, but it works for me.
Well, that's, of course, the key. That's the touchstone. When you talk about what he says or she says or they say, Talk about dialogue. I mean, because a lot of like the transcripts that you have here come out of dialogue, and you have to be pretty sharply tuned to an ear for different voices and trying to capture different voices. Talk about how that comes across for you.
That's a great question. So I will say the hardest thing for me to write is dialogue. And in fact, often in the very first draft, I will just put a placeholder like conversation here with son about X and come back to that later when I have more energy, because I find dialogue very hard to write. As far as the transcripts of the podcast, which is obviously all dialogue because it's an interview, those were certainly the most fun to write. And I got a lot of feedback from the early readers that were helping me with this story that, I definitely wanted to get the dialect of a lot of the characters because, again, Meg is going across the country and all these people are in different places. So I wanted some of the vocabulary to be different based on where they were, and some of like the verbal tics that people have to be apparent. And then it did take several drafts to make it sound more like a conversation, and that was challenging and fun for sure.
Did you do research into dialects or the way people speak?
I did. This book was so fun to write. I did a lot of research about, what would somebody in Kansas say, or what is an iconic place in Buffalo, New York that somebody might visit, different foods. Meg is very obsessed with water. So again, this is another reference back to The Wizard of Oz and to Wild. Those two stories both have a lot of water symbolism, like the Wicked Witch of the West is killed, the witch is killed with water at the end, and in Wild, Cheryl Strayed, like water is her, like that is her sole focus, is getting water at each place, and so Meg similarly needs to be near water, and so it was really fun researching. Like what's a source of water in Boulder, Colorado? What's a pond or a stream that she might encounter in Kansas? Because the more to the middle of the country you get, the less water that we're used to, here on the coast are. So so that was required a lot of research as well.
Kansas makes us all think about Dorothy, of course, but you're making us throughout the novel think about Dorothy as well as Cheryl Strayed's character. And you mentioned that you've done a lot of reading, been a vociferous reader. What other novelists have particularly influenced you, not only in this novel, but other novels you've written?
Oh, that I love that question. I'd say definitely my favorite modern novelist is Amor Towles, who I know you've interviewed, and I was there when you interviewed him. He wrote Rules of Civility, which is my all-time favorite book, and Gentleman in Moscow. He's also written some just utterly delightful short stories that are less well known, and he has a new novel coming out, which I am counting the days for. I just find him incredibly clever. And
can we give a plug for the National Kidney Foundation Luncheon, which your mother has been associated with for years?
Yeah.
One of the writers this
Hopefully
year.
we can.
And I'll be interviewing him for that event this year.
Yeah, he is just a complete idol of mine. I think he is, the story as a broader story, it is fascinating in his books, but then also the lines, like the detailed words that he gives, are just genius, in my opinion. I also really love Curtis Sittenfeld. She wrote a book. Well, she's written many books. I love her book Sisterland, which is, I think, one of her lesser known novels. She writes great short stories. So those are some of my favorites. I will read anything that either one of them writes.
Good influences, both of them. Good to hear you mention them both. Let's talk about what you mean, though, because this is really something that you grapple with by a big life.
Yeah, so this is something that Meg is kind of obsessed with in the book. And I think it's particular to maybe people of my age group. late 40s, early 50s, when you kind of realize that you're about halfway done, and you just kind of wonder, is this the life I want to have? Should I have done something else? If I have the chance, should I still do something else? And in fact, I'm in a Facebook group of thousands of women about my age. And just last night, somebody posted something like, I'm 50, I'm thinking of divorcing my husband and traveling around the world and quitting my job. And then there were like a gazillion comments underneath saying, me too, me too. And I wanted to write, I just wrote a book about this, because it was really, I think Meg captures that feeling that both men and women feel in middle age, as, have I had the life I want? And for Meg, she wants a big life, but doesn't know if she can do it. And for her, a big life isn't like being a celebrity or anything like that. It's just kind of living with a certain like joie de vivre and doing something as monumental as like packing up your life and getting in an RV and leaving your home.
Of course, she's a divorced woman, and she's also a woman whose child has gone off to college, and those play central roles in terms of this desire for the big life.
Right, and that's why the novel starts with the funeral of her mother, who she had a very fraught relationship with. Her child is now a college student, something I can relate to. I have a freshman and sophomore in college, and she'd been divorced a couple years before, in a very surprising divorce for reasons that come clear pretty early in the novel. And she realizes, like, what is she? She's not anybody's child anymore. She's not an active parent, and she's not a spouse. So, like, who is she to other people? What is she? Who is she to herself? And I think that is a lot of what women my age, and men too, probably feel.
Well, the label that one puts on that, which certainly draws in many readers, is search for identity. But you're talking not necessarily about something limited to a woman of this age group. You're trying to get at the more human, universal side of this, aren't you?
Exactly. I mean, I call it a coming of middle age novel, but I think that these questions apply to everybody who is self-aware and interested in their identity, and taking kind of a meta look at their own lives and their own sense of identity.
And this novel remains, I mean, now, it's out there and people have an opportunity to buy it and read it and so forth. It remains exciting to you, doesn't it? Why?
I just think that this novel, well, I had a lot of fun writing it. So, like I said, I love all my novels. I am really proud of all of them. This was the one that was the most fun for me to write. And it's also gotten a lot of people have said this is very cinematic. I can see this as a television show. I could see this, as a real podcast. And so hearing other people's excitement for it keeps me very excited. And a lot of people have asked for a sequel, and, what's she going to do next? I want to read more podcast transcripts. So I, feed off that enthusiasm of readers.
What about reader response, just in terms of surprises to you as an author, things that maybe you didn't even see when you were writing the novel or don't think of now?
Well, it's funny because I had a lot of friends text me. I don't want to give anything away, but there's, I'd say about 2/3 of the way through the novel, Meg does something that's a little surprising. And maybe because some of my friends think that I'm Meg, but I'm not. But they're like, I can't believe she did that. And I didn't think it was that surprising, but I think the readers are having some fun with that. Yeah, I don't want to say any more, but I think you'll know when you get there in the book.
No spoilers, but the fact of the matter is that sometimes when you take on a novel like this, as well outlined as you constructed this novel, I mean, all the preparation you do with an outline and everything, still you get surprises. Things as a novelist occur that you and characters maybe even say things and cast shadows that surprise you. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, that's where I allow myself to veer when I'm writing. I think, something else that has been surprising is that the 7 questions have really resonated with people. And in fact, I had a woman I've worked with before, an editor, tell me that she asked her husband the 7 questions after reading the book, and that she learned things about her husband, with whom she has 2 kids and has been married a long time, that she didn't know before. And so that's really surprising, that these questions and Meg's interest in people extends beyond Meg, I guess.
And those 7 questions, talk again about how you came to essentially create them, or what was behind them in your mind as an author.
Well, I mean, it's different for every question. So, for example, the first question is, there are 7 billion people in the world and 7 billion paths. Like, what is it like to be you right now? And I remember that came from, I had a yoga teacher who used to say 7 billion people, 7 billion paths. And that just really stuck with me. And so I thought that was a great way to kind of zero in on like who this character, this podcast interviewee is. And then there's another question of, if there's an afterlife, what is one thing that you would take with you? And I just thought that was another great way, like, to find out what matters to people, right? I think you would get 7 billion different answers if you really asked everybody. And then there's a question of, what was your pivot moment? And I think we can all relate to looking back on our lives and realizing that it might have been a big shift or a smaller shift, but there was a pivot moment in our lives. And so having characters zero in on that, again, it will illuminate who they are. And then the one of the last questions is, what's your motto for life? And I had a lot of fun with that. And that's partly because I'm interested. I had to research sort of, what are people's mottos for lives, and what could a motto for life be? And some are funny and some are poignant. And again, they're just a way to kind of get into a character's head.
Of course, those things change too as time changes. And
Mhm.
when you think of all the mottos I used to have as opposed to ones I have now in this stage of life and so forth, I like to, just like you like to surprise as a novelist, I like to surprise sometimes with questions. You said something about yoga. That's a practice of yours, and does that tie in with writing novels at all, or in what ways?
Yeah, it is. It is a practice of mine. I about 6 or 7 years ago, I got certified as a yoga teacher, and not to teach yoga for a career, but I do it as volunteer work. I teach yoga in high schools, but I just really liked the practice and wanted to like dive deep and learn more about it. And as somebody who, I definitely have suffered from anxiety for a long time, and I have found that it's one of the things that really helps ground me. It's not a cure-all, but it helps a lot. And I think because yoga and meditation give you a little bit of distance on your thoughts and feelings, it helps me to get grounded, and then to maybe take like a bird's eye view of my life and maybe the lives of others around me. And that can be fodder for stories.
That's grist for the mill. Do your own anxieties help propel you as a writer?
Do my anxiety? Yeah, I mean, I think they do. I mean, every book that I have written is about something that I'm trying to figure out in my own life. So, for example, Cheer is a novel about parenthood that I wrote when my kids were younger. I mean, it's so, I don't know what the word is, but it's so vulnerable to be a parent, to just, love somebody that much. And So the book Cheer kind of explores that, and Heads or Tails is about friendship, and that was something, my friendships were changing in my late 30s, early 40s, and I really wanted to take a look at that. And Beshert, my third novel, was about faith. It's a romance, it's a modern romance, but it has themes of faith and what does it mean to be Jewish. And these are all, I don't know if I'd call them anxieties, but these are things that occupy my brain a lot. And so novels are kind of a way for me to maybe work through anxieties, or at least kind of explore those themes in my own life.
Novels become kind of a catharsis, you're saying? Maybe a release?
I think so, because a lot of people have asked, like particularly with Heads or Tails, my second book, oh, there should be a sequel, and maybe there will be someday, but it's really like I feel like I completed that, like I did that study, and I got what I needed out of it. I think I wrote a great story, but now I have a new issue that I want to explore, and so yeah, I think that helps me come up with ideas.
So frame the question for Peeps. What was the question that was really central here?
I think it was really about identity and what do I want, or what does somebody at this age, like what can our lives still be? And I hope that it ends on a hopeful place, that really, like, yes, I'm middle-aged, but I really have a whole lifetime ahead of me, right? And so does Meg. And so I guess it was just the bigger question of what does it mean to be middle-aged, and does your identity have to be solidified at that point, or can it still change and be explored?
Let's explore a little bit, if we could, your relationship with Meg, because she's clearly a kind of alter ego, but at the same time, someone you're very close to, and someone maybe you could almost feel maternal about, or sisterly about, or
Yeah.
how would you describe your relationship with her?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. I like her. I like her a lot, and I admire her.
Likable, yeah.
Yeah. She did something I'm not sure I could do, which is to pick up my life and move it along somewhere else. I think she's brave. I think she's really brave. And so I like her. She also, her best friend is a variation of my best friend. So we have that in common.
And let's at least give some attention to the other characters, and particularly characters that you feel you've created who are not only memorable, but really, I'll use that phrase I used before, cast shadows for you, maybe that you didn't even anticipate as an author.
In Peeps, or in general? Yeah,
In Peeps.
Well, I think anybody who knows me will probably recognize that, and I did not set out to do this intentionally, but it's pretty apparent that her relationship with her college-age son is very similar to my relationship with my son. They have a great relationship, and she really just enjoys him a lot. And I think readers are really liking that, and they see that affection that she has for her son, and if they know me, they know that's how I feel about my kid. And I think a lot of people have said that some of these podcast characters, the transcripts, some of those people, even though they're just a few pages each, they have really stuck with them, and they stick with me too. They all have sort of a purpose for Meg, and they also have their own stories that I think are really compelling.
Well, you once described writing Peeps to me as a novel that you felt the most proud of with those other novels that you've done. I'd like to find out why. Why do you feel special? I mean, they're all like your children, aren't they? So why do you feel the most pride for this child?
Yeah, well, like I said, I like them all. I think mostly, well, two reasons. One, I think it's definitely the most original story, just in the formatting, in terms of, there's a broader narrative, but then in between are these kind of little short stories. And I think that was kind of fun and original. So I'm happy about that. And I think also it was very fun to write. It was, I liked meeting all these people. And so and I'm also very pleased with the feedback that I'm getting. You know, it's been getting a lot of good reviews, and both from readers, but also like in magazines and things. And so I'm very happy about that.
Well, it's certainly pleasant to hear you speak about that happiness and satisfaction and pleasure. In fact, speaking of readers and questions, let me look at a few that are coming through in the chat line.
Great.
Emily says, question for Erin, is there a podcast interviewee that resonates most with your lived experience?
That's a really good question. I really like, there's a man who, there's one of the podcast interviewees is an older man who had been dishonorably discharged from the Vietnam War because he was gay. And then he gets that reversed when Obama becomes president. And I have kind of a soft spot for him. And so I guess I would say that one. I mean, I don't know anybody like that, but I just, I enjoyed writing him. He meant a lot to me.
Well, it's clear that a number of them mean a lot to you, but you mentioned earlier that obituaries used to be a kind of a catalyst for your imagination. You thought, boy, there's some real stories here. And these characters come out of reading obituaries?
Oh, yeah. Well, no, that's yes and no. So I would say I keep a notebook of sort of conflicts or just issues. And again, read Dear Abby. There's a novel in every single letter because there's tension, there's conflict. That's what people are writing to her about. So some of these little notions come from reading Dear Abby, reading obituaries. Nobody was taken directly, but like I think I read a newspaper article about a man who had his dishonorable discharge reversed. And so I was like, someday I'm going to put that in a novel because I just loved that. And also, like I was mentioning, I'm in this big group on Facebook of middle-aged women. And so many of the posts are like, each post could be a novel because people have questions and conflicts and tension in their lives, and they're seeking support from other people. So a lot of times I'll just write down things like that. So nobody directly, but ideas for situations that characters are put in are taken from things like obituaries and newspaper articles and things like that.
Maybe talk a bit, if you would, because, you know, I'm married to a lawyer, how your legal career and how, having studied the law and been practicing lawyer, how'd that fit into this novel?
Well, how did it fit into this novel? There are some podcast interviewees who have experienced some Me Too situations that are sort of references to things that I experienced in the legal career long before Me Too was even a thing. So
I suspected as much, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't as veiled as I thought, I guess. So there's more than one character where some of what they have gone through is what I have gone through. I don't regret being a lawyer. I don't regret going to law school. I certainly gained a lot of critical thinking skills and discipline and endurance and things like that from being a law student and passing the bar and being a lawyer. I was so ill-suited for the situation I found myself in that I'm glad I got out when I did.
And what about the journalism background? I mean, that plays even a more preeminent role, doesn't it?
Yeah. So after I left law, I went back to school and I got a master's in journalism, and I was I still am a legal affairs journalist. I think a lot of Meg's interviewing skill is drawn from my 20 plus years being a reporter and having to interview people for a living. So and then obviously, you know, just having writing skills and being able to write on deadline and all of that helped me write the novel for sure.
Let's talk about interviewing skills for, well, it's a subject obviously that interests
I'm with
me.
the master, so yes, let's talk about it.
No, nice of you to say, but there is a technique that some people call an art of interviewing, others call it a craft of interviewing. What are you thinking of with this podcast, craft or art?
Ooh, what do you think?
Well, I think it's both, actually. I think both play significant roles and kind of mesh in some respects.
Yeah, I was going to say both as well. I mean, I think something that you and Meg have in common is that I think, you have to be deeply interested in the person that you're talking to have an authentic, interesting interview. And I mean, you certainly have that skill, and I think she does too. She wouldn't be doing this if she didn't truly find everyday people really interesting, and if they didn't touch her life in some way. And so I think it is an art and a craft and a passion for her.
Somebody else wants to know what podcasts you listen to mostly or more than others.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm a knitter, and so I listen to a lot of knitting podcasts. But I'd say my favorite mainstream podcasts are, I listen to Happier with Gretchen Rubin. I don't know if you've ever interviewed Gretchen Rubin, but she's
I
great.
did
She's
years
also
ago. Yeah.
a former lawyer turned writer. And then her sister has a companion podcast called Happier in Hollywood. And I've been listening to both since the beginning, and it's the kind of thing, the day they drop, I listen on that day. I just really enjoy those. So,
Would you want to do a podcast?
well, I mean, again, the idea for Peeps was originally mine, and if I had the skill and the time and the energy, and could travel across the country talking to people, that would be amazing. I mean, I have always had a very secret ambition of like wanting to be a talk show host or something. That's like fantasy life. So I think the practical answer is no, but in fantasy land, yes.
Well, you mentioned curiosity that interviewers have, and that's kind of the key in many respects. And I'm curious, you're moved by writing. You're a very obviously dedicated and committed mother and wife and friend. But let's talk about your other interests just for a moment, because we only got a few moments left. Knitting, yoga, writing, what else is up there?
Oh,
And
wow.
maybe even plays a role in Peeps.
Well, I have wonderful friends, many of whom are on this call, and thank you all for being here. Yeah, I'm very passionate about my children, and I love spending time in Lake Tahoe. That's a big passion of mine. I love to knit. I love to do yoga.
Stay away now because the smoke is making it
No,
unbeautiful.
I know it's actually in the green today for the first time in a month or two. So I'm happy about that. I play mahjong. I've recently picked up pickleball. I just, I'm actually a big introvert and like to be at home. So just, having a day at home, reading and writing and doing yoga and knitting, it's kind of nerdy, but that's what I like to do.
Well, how much time for reading and how much time for writing? And is it every day for both?
For reading, yes. And I always have an actual book, like a hard book or a Kindle book, and an audio book. So I usually have two books going. And for writing, if I'm working on a project, whether it's a magazine story, or a novel, it's usually 5 days a week, but not necessarily so. And writing a novel is really grueling, and I can only do it for probably about 2.5, 3 hours at a stretch. It really kind of makes my mind want to explode after a while. I have much more stamina with like a magazine piece. So if I'm working on something, it's usually 5 days a week. I'm not a 7-day a week writer, no.
Roughly, what's the time scheme for you to complete a novel then?
Yeah, so I would say about a year to write a novel, with at least 6 months of that is outlining and plotting.
And a question from Christy, who says, who is the other author besides Amor Tolls that you appreciate, and why again do you love those authors, and what books did you read as a child?
Oh, so it was Amor Tolls and Curtis Sittenfeld. And don't be fooled by the name. Curtis is a woman, short story writer and novel writer, just very, very clever woman. What I read everything as a child that I could. And I really, I'm jealous of the kids who are around now. It seems like they're so much more geared towards kids and young adults than there was in my day. I was, anybody who's my age was a huge Judy Blume fan, and she is really what made me want to be a novelist. I just thought her books were just struck them. They just resonated so much, and I read them over and over and over. So I would put Judy Blume at the top of the list. Anything she wrote.
Does she still come back to you in terms of your own creations?
Yeah, sometimes. And in fact, I've read recently some of her, adult fiction that she's read or that she's written recently. She's also an independent bookstore owner, which I really admire. Yeah, I mean, I also did her master class. That she has a master class on writing, which it was just, I learned a lot, and I also just admire her so much. It was just wonderful to hear her talk. So yeah, I think that, just all of her work has seeped into me by osmosis.
Well, I hope that Peeps will creep into many people and sink into many people by osmosis. I hope that you will read the book. It's a great read, and it's been splendid talking to you, and I enjoyed it very much. And congratulations on the novel, and may it be a great success.
Thank you. And I just want to say, Nick, I hope it's okay if I can say 2 quick thank yous. So first of all, I want to thank you, Michael, because as we talked about the other day, I know you are used to interviewing presidents and Pulitzer Prize winners. And so I really appreciate you doing this. It's always wonderful to talk to you. And I really appreciate you doing it in this format publicly with me. And I also really want to thank Book Passage and Elaine, hopefully she's listening, because I'm an independent author, and for a bookstore that is as prominent as Book Passage to promote local authors and independent authors, it really means a lot. And I just want to thank you all at Book Passage for doing this. And everybody should buy books at independent bookstores and support places like Book Passage. So thank you, Michael, and thank you, Book Passage. I really, really appreciate it.
And thank you, Erin, and thank you, Book Passage, as well. And we'll throw things back to you, Nick.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. And we are, at least at Book Passage, I think I can speak for the store when I say we are always extremely happy to host independent authors, regardless of your Twitter following or whatever. We're just happy to have books and authors come through, and we are, I think, more happy that you chose us to come and have a chat with today. And we are very, very, very lucky, I think probably most of all, to have everybody in the audience who's watching here today coming out and saying hello to us, supporting bookstores, particularly the independent ones, and supporting authors and interviewers and speakers just like who we have here today. So let me thank all of the audience today. Thanks for coming out. I hope that you find the time to purchase Peeps, the book today, either from bookpassage.com. You can find it at the blue link just at the top of the YouTube chat. We'll ship it directly to your house, just like every other online retailer. But if you can't go to Book Passage, do your best to buy it at one of the independent bookstores that are near you. I know there are a lot of people from Florida, a lot of people from, I believe, Ohio that watch our show a lot. Michael Krasny's home state. Original state. There are tons and tons of really, truthfully excellent independent bookstores there. So go and patronize them as well. Tell them Book Passage sent you. We love all of our colleagues all across the United States, all across the world. So thank you one last time for coming out today. Thank you to Erin and Michael for coming. And I do truthfully hope to see you all in the next one. Bye.
Thank you.